Um, First of all, my name is Cheryl Crosman, and I'm with FileOnQ. I'll be overseeing this today, but I am not the expert. Who you will be listening to today is the ever famous Joe Latta. He is the executive director of IAPE, and he is retired from the Burbank PD in California. And then you'll also be hearing from a wonderful, amazing person named Shannon Turner. And Shannon has a lot of information about uh, how to integrate software into your everyday life to make everything work better for you and to move things forward. We also have with us today some members of the IAPE board. So we have Joe Morale, who is the president of IAPE, and he is with the city of Chico in California. And we have Kirsten Hammerberg, who's the second vice president of IAPE, and she's with the Minneapolis PD in Minnesota. And Rick Meadows, who is our treasurer from IAPE, and he's the deputy director of OPOTA in Ohio. And they will be on standby to ask for you guys to ask any questions. So if at any point you have questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat box, and they will answer those as we go through. Okay? So I am going to turn this over to Joe Latta, who will walk us through the presentation. Again, any questions, just go ahead and put it in the chat box, and we are happy to answer those questions. And then at the end, we will go over some of the questions so that the group can benefit from all of your wonderful questions. So I'm going to turn this over to Joe and Shannon, who will be working together to help educate you guys today. Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Cheryl, and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about probably one of our biggest problem issues in property is getting rid of the stuff. If you've ever been to our class, we call it stuff, we call it crapola, and we have a lot of it, but we can't seem to get rid of it. As the executive director with IAPE, I've been here about 31, 32 years. I've been teaching classes for about 40 years, and I've seen it all. There's not many things you can't tell me, but disposition, getting rid of it seems to be our biggest struggle. IAPE has some professional standards, and we'll share with you about on how to get rid of this stuff and some guidance for you how to get rid of it. But first of all, let's talk about disposition and the definition. This is our IAPE definition. It's the final outcome of items which includes releases to the owner or designee, sale of unclaimed property at auction, the diversion to agency use, release to another authorized entity, or destruction and final disposal. That is the definition in our professional standards. And what I've done today, I've taken our professional standards, and if you remember, you get a copy of these every year with updates and whatnot. So I took our standard, and there's 9 sections to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at these different sections for this presentation. The review and purge system policy, which a lot of us don't have. We'll talk about that. Actual purging systems, the review purging system elements, extended retention, and we need to keep it longer, and some things we need to do when we keep it longer, and maybe ways of getting rid of it after we've been keeping it for a long time. The authority, who should be making the decision, releasing it to the owners, auctions, diverting it to city or county use, and the final part of the disposition is destruction and removal. Some of you, when you look at this young lady here, you notice she's not a very happy camper. One of the things in our standards, we talk about providing guidance to the property room personnel on the disposition of property. Ladies and gentlemen, I've taught about 40,000 people. If you've been to the class, we always ask you, how many of you have a purging policy? And the scary fact is, from talking to the students in the class, and usually by hand, raise your hand if you have, and I'm going to ask this very in a manner that don't just say yes or no. We're going to give you a survey a little bit later. But do you have good policies that if you retired tomorrow, that the new person could come in and open that policy, and it could be 25 pages on purging. That gives you line by line, step by step by step by step on how to purge evidence. I know for a fact that 65% of us do not have that. We may have a few lines in our policy, but I want to know if you have one that tells you everything on how to do it, and the scary fact that we don't have it. Now, typically in law enforcement agents, we have a general order or SOPs. And in that general order or SOP, that's for all the stakeholders in the organization. So it tells the officers how to book it into the system, and it tells the officers who are responsible for the disposing of property what their responsibilities are, not a how-to. Then we always advocate having a property manual. That should be what we were just talking about, a step-by-step procedure to the property person on how the process works, step by step by step. It should be the roadmap on how to get it. If you're the manager or supervisor, can you look at that document and know what all your people are supposed to be doing? Another thing, how do we do evaluations of people when they don't have guidelines on how to do it? And I think that's really important in the evaluation process. So moving on, 15.1 in our professional standards talked about review and purge system policy. So first of all, who is responsible for the final disposition? As a best practice and based upon our standards, we say the case officer or the detective should be the person. There's sometimes exceptions to it, but that person probably knows more about it than anyone else. Now, the evidence officer may not know the specific evidence in that case and is not related. They don't know that it's not related to another case. So if we've given that authority to the property officer, could they make a decision? They get information from the court back. It's okay to get rid of this, or the case is over with, and they do exactly what the court has said. Could that evidence be related to another case? And the property officer may not know that. If I say property officer, evidence officers, same thing. Just because the case has been adjudicated doesn't mean the evidence may not have a link or relationship to another case. So we always have to be very careful about that. Now, my next slide here, we're still in the policy, some best practices. The evidence and property officer manages all the review and purging notifications to the case officer and the detective, not making a decision. Again, the evidence and property officer is the person who manages the purge system. Should the evidence officer do all the research? Well, there's some interesting facts about that, that the case research is the most time-consuming step in the purging process. Departments that handle research in the property require twice the staff compared to those where the case officer does the research. Folks, listen very carefully. Purging an item out of the property room takes more time than anything else we do. And sometimes we get way far behind because of that purging element. If you ask anybody who's been in the property room for a long time, if they were starting from scratch tomorrow, they may have enough people working in the property room to stay on top of it. But when we start looking at that stuff that's getting older and older, that's 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, it can take us hours to get rid of one item out of our inventory. Here's an interesting fact for you all to be aware of. The evidence officer, property officer, frequently ends up with the research task as it's not addressed in policy. Ask yourself, is it in your policy? Who's responsible? And the case officer, in some cases, are too busy. If you look at the gentleman over, he said, I'm too busy. I think a lot of our civilian evidence technicians have had to detect, hey, I don't have time to deal with that. And well, that's fine, but the research is then forced on the property room out of necessity, and the policy doesn't cover it. And the property officer states, if I don't do the research, no one else will. And if they don't do it, it gets backed up. And I would say a lot of our departments, they have evidence going back 30, 40 years, and it's nothing crimes. It's found property, it's safekeeping, it's property crimes. It's not robberies, rapes, and kidnappings, but it's just junk. Now, the 15.1, continuing about policy, uh, the best practice here, and I'm kind of going to go through some bullets here. The property record is date and time stamped. Now, again, this is the process. This is how the system should work. The property record, date and time stamp when we receive it in the property. So we know when it came in. That starts our chain of custody in the property room. The computer should calculate a date for a review of the case. So it comes in today, and we're going to put an arbitrary time. whether, and we'll talk about times in a couple minutes, but the computer should be keeping track of those times. The computer generates a review notice to the responsible time once we've reached that time. And now, returned review notices are returned to the property officer. The computer monitors unanswered ones. So when we sent the notice out to the property office, I'm sorry, to the case officer, and they don't, the computer should be telling us, Officer so-and-so, Detective so-and-so has not responded. That's when the supervisor needs to get involved in it. The property, now when we do get it back, the property acts on those case officers and responses to destroy, return it to the owner, divert it, auction it, and all those other things that happen. I think, Shannon, you can probably give me a line or two on how a good computer system can send out notices. Are you there?
I sure am. A good computer system should do several things. Number one, it should set a review date. It should just know instinctively when this item should come up for review. Most agencies have it based on the severity of the crime. So if it's a misdemeanor, it might come up for review at like a year. The more severe the case, the longer it's going to be before it comes up for review. So that's the first thing a good system should do. Secondly, when it does come up for review, a good system should be able to send out notification to the investigating officer, the detective assigned, whoever you determine, and ask them, hey, what's going on with this case? It's up for review. Can you tell me, has it been adjudicated? What's going on? And then that notification should have some rules in it where, say, if they don't respond within, say, 30 days, it will send them another and another and another. It'll hunt them down until they dispo out their property.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, now the next slide we have here on Systems 15.2, best practice here. Every item of property evidence entering the property room needs to have some type of review date, which we've been talking about, linked to the record for future review. The bottom line is, if there is no review date established at time of receipt, the case may be forgotten. I should probably say will be forgotten and take up valuable real estate far longer than necessary. As I'm talking, I want to put some pictures up here. I want to show you some of our clients that we've had over the years. And I would say the pictures you're looking at, that 80 to 90% of the evidence that you're looking at could have been purged years ago, but they had no review system in place that they're going to look at it on an annual basis, or sometimes even less time than that. Take a look at those, folks. How would you like to work in those property rooms? Those are real live property rooms with old stuff, of which most of it is purgeable. We did an audit or some work in a very, very large city in New York. I won't mention what city it was, but they have about 10 million items. And during our discussions in our class, we asked them what percentage of their evidence was eligible to get rid of. If they said if they had the right software, if they had the right management support, if they had enough staffing, and if they had all the things that make an evidence system work, probably 80% of their 10 million items could have been purged. Folks, 80% of 10 million is 8 million items they could get rid of, but they don't have all the components that make it work. 80%. Ask yourself, tell your boss if they're listening in right now, ask how much stuff do you have that you think you could get rid of if you had sufficient personnel and all the other things that make it work. Now, on the purging system, policy will define the method used to determine. Sometimes we use the statute of limitations. Sometimes we use what's called the case officer notification, where we send them a notice. There's another one we're going to talk about that I think is really good. It's called the accelerated review. We'll spend a second or two on the administrative kill. That's where management makes decisions. We're going to get rid of X. And sometimes we rely on the courts or prosecutors to notify when a case is adjudicated. What we forget about, though, if you look at any police organization, evidence comes in, half the cases may not ever have a suspect. And the bottom line is, if they don't have a suspect, the courts and prosecutors are probably never going to even know about the case. And so some of that stuff becomes the stuff that sits around forever and sometimes even longer. Okay, continuing. The next one is the statute of limitations. And Shannon and I were talking about this the other day, and she says when she teaches her classes, this one jumps right up to the top. So remember, the statute of limitations is where the crime can no longer be charged. Here in California, misdemeanors are usually, most of them are 1 year, and your felonies start out at 5 years, and they go, depending on the severity of the crime, it'll go a little bit longer. And again, if somebody pleads guilty versus being found guilty, we're never even going to have to deal with it. It's over with when that person is.
Right.
The statute of limitations, it's the legally defined time in which a criminal or civil action may be initiated. Uh, if you want to say something about this, Shannon, go ahead. I know
Sure.
how it's jumped out on your list.
That's one of those things that I'm incredibly passionate about. You have to remember, one of the first things I ask people is, okay, how long are you holding things? Well, we have to hold them for the statute of limitations. And I say, do you really? You really don't. It's like Joe said, the statute of limitations is how long you have to charge somebody with a crime. Once they have been charged with that crime, statute of limitations goes out the window. Um, and I always give the example, what if someone is arrested for burglary? Okay. And now in Washington State, the statute of limitations for burglary is 3 years. So let's say that you had said, well, I have to hold this evidence for 3 years because that's the statute of limitations. Someone gets arrested over the weekend, they get charged. 6 months later, they plead guilty and they get credit for time served and they're out and they're done. And if you were to hold something for the statute of limitations, you would hold it for another 2.5 years beyond that 6 months after the case had been adjudicated. So remember that statute of limitations only applies to no suspect cases. If there is no suspect, then yes, you have to hold it for the statute of limitations. If there is someone charged, then don't worry about statute of limitations. That doesn't apply anymore.
Thank you very much. Let's go on to the next one there. This is the case officer notification. That's where the property room, this is probably the most common, where we notify the case officer, detective, submitting officer, sometimes it's a submitting officer, that they have stuff that we want to get rid of, and please review this. I use the term review notice. It's a review, a purge notice. Sometimes we do it with our computer system. That's when we're really on top of the game. Sometimes we do it by email. Sometimes we phone them, and sometimes we have a paper form that we send them. Now that goes out to them. And the next part of the equation is we have to talk about the policy needs required that the review forms are tracked by the property officer. Yes, that is your job. When you send it out today and they have so many days to respond to it, and that would be in your general order. That's one of their responsibilities. They have to have it back by a certain time. And if you don't do that, we're going to forget about it. Now, the one I like the best and the system that I grew up in, it was called an accelerated review. An accelerated review is reviewing the case before the statute of limitations is reached. So I'll ask all of you, can answer yourself, is when you make an arrest, and kind of like what Shannon was just saying, when you make an arrest in your community, we have a body, and they're going to have to go to court. Is it fair to say in most cases that might be adjudicated within a year? Well, if that's a true statement, there's a time limit we can start reviewing it. And now, for example, at burglaries, 3 years. And the same example that Shannon was giving. What if we look at it after 1 year? Doesn't that make a lot more sense? And so what we've done was we freed up that space on the shelf with that you were going to keep it for 3 years. Now we're only going to have it on our shelf for possibly a year or less. The next one is the administrative kill. It's not one that we recommend, but sometimes you have to do it and for some good reasons. And the administrative kill is when an agency determines that items may be purged based upon the age of the case, the item type or crime type, with little or no future research required. The administrative kill is the riskiest, but sometimes the only alternative. Now, we've been in property homes where they haven't purged things for 40 years, and you get into it, and 80 or 90% of it is eligible to be purged. And that's when, and I'll give you some more bullets here. I said this is suggested for agencies that have no purging policy, and inventory we're purging has never occurred or almost never occurred and completely out of space. And we're asking to build a new building when in fact we don't need a new building. We need to get rid of the stuff that we have. And that's another fallacy. We get these requests for people to build a new facility when in fact the property room, 90% of what they have shouldn't even be in the property room. Suggested candidates, all misdemeanors over. Let's give Burbank. Let's give California. The suggestion may be let's look at all of our misdemeanors that are over 2 years, over 3 years old, and that becomes the candidate. Let's look at all felony property crimes over 5 years old, where the statute is 3 years. And again, you have to come up with a candidate list. Next is the chief and sheriff, or the chief executive officer and prosecutor's office have to be all in tune with this. So that's where you're going to have to sit down with them and say, and I would always suggest everybody, and we ask the question in the class all the time, how many of you have ever brought your your custodian, I'll be okay. How many of you have brought your prosecutor into the property room to see what your struggles are? And sometimes it's a struggle to get them in there, but sometimes when they see the elements or the environment that you're working in, they may be very helpful. Okay. Suggested question to ask: what percent of all your misdemeanor evidence is beyond the statute of limitations? I would suggest, unless you're in a community that had lots and lots of serious crimes, most of our cities across the country, the vast majority of our evidence is probably misdemeanor. And usually misdemeanors are short term, usually 1 year, sometimes 2 years. So how much of that is beyond the statute of limitations? And we're looking as a candidate. Now, the young lady here is laughing when if you look at the question here, the courts or prosecutor notifications. That's when the prosecutor routinely sends a case status reports to the case officer or property officer. Hey, the case is over with. Go ahead and get rid of it. The same thing. The court routinely sends you things. And most people will agree that that doesn't happen. That's something that you have to make it happen by communicating with the prosecutors in the court. We'll talk about that in a minute. And again, what about cases that were not filed and with no suspects? That's always going to be an issue because everybody has forgotten it. Now, research facts. The evidence officers, when researching cases for a dispo and don't have access to the court or the DA, you have two choices: push, pull. Remember these. There's two systems: push and pull. The push system is when the courts and the prosecutors routinely provide the property room with dispositions sent to you or maybe sent to the detective. And again, that's going to be up to you. But the information is routinely pushed at you. That is the best practice. Does not happen without you communicating with those folks that you need their assistance. In my career, when I took over the property room, it was out of control, and I met with the court, not the clerk, but the court administrator, and we came up with a system where she sent me court dispositions every Monday for 12 years. And again, the case was over with. So that stimulated the movement of cases that were over with. The list that she sent me were adjudicated cases. The next one, if you must routinely contact the courts and prosecutors and do all that work we do, it's a pull system. Pull systems are 10 times at a minimum more time consuming to get rid of something. Folks, 10 times, because you know how many phone calls you make, emails you to try to get the information when in fact you want it sent to you. But it does take a dialogue between you and the department, the prosecutor, and the judge. That's the push system, and that's what you're striving for. Here's another one, 15.3, reviews and purging the elements of the system. Establish review times and dates. Set response times. Policy needs to define the date when any review systems are to be sent to the case officer / detective, sometimes a submitting officer. Policy needs to mandate to the case officer, detective, the date the review notices is to be returned. So in other words, your policy says that the detectives or whoever gets a notice from the property room shall respond back to the property room within, we'll say, 15 days. Any exceptions, and this is something you want to always put in your policy, any exceptions to this must be approved by their supervisor. So it puts the onus on the case officer, detective, that when they get these notices, they have a responsibility. And for some reason they're on vacation or something, then they need to get the approval of their supervisor. And lastly, policy needs to mandate when the property officer is required to follow up on the review notices. So it should be your responsibility that when these things go out, you're going to check it after 7 days, 14 days, 21, whatever the time date is. Now, when we go to 15.4, this is always a good one. We call it extended retention. Define special requirements for extended retention. And I'm 99% sure, especially on the civilian side, you've got something written on a property record that says you need to keep it forever because I said so. And the policy needs to mandate it in instances where the case officer wants the items retained longer, a justification is mandated in the record. So when you send something to the detective and they want to keep it for a period longer, I have no problem with that. But I need to know why you want to keep it longer because that detective may retire, move on to another agency or whatever. And the next person that gets this review, they have no idea why the previous detective kept it longer. And it's like on a warrant issued. Maybe you put the warrant number, have them put the warrant number on there. So you, as the property officer, the next time it comes up, you can just go into the system and see if the warrant is still active. But we need to be very proactive with this. Want to ensure compliance? Require the case officer supervisor approval. So, in other words, the detective wants to keep it for further investigation. And what that notice has to do, it goes through the supervisor, and the supervisor, is this a justified reason for keeping it longer? I guarantee you that when you put when it goes to the supervisor, the holes will probably go away. Another one, if you run into one for let's make it a relatively small department. There's one property officer. We have a young property officer who's been there for about a year, and he or she runs into a property record, and they will. And I know you've all seen these. When I say all, a lot of you have seen it. It will say hold forever. It's a burglary case. Hold forever. As a burglary detective, I know why the detective said hold it forever because I want to make sure nobody gets rid of it prematurely. Well, the problem with hold forever is the property person sees that and goes, "Oh my God, I have to keep this forever," and they just completely ignore it. Hold forever should be a felony in my mind, and that we should probably send the that detective to work in the property room for 6 months. Okay, don't let them put hold forever, and because I want to be able to pick it up on the review system. Define special requirements. Re-review. The re-review is they say I want to keep it for another year. That's fine. I have no problem. But the computer after that 1 year is the process where it goes back to, and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again. So if we're looking at things annually, the detective, if he's for 10 years it's been in the property, he or she will have looked at it at least 10 times. The issue. Case officer places a hold on the evidence for whatever reason. The case officer changes assignment, as we mentioned, promoted, retired, or changes, and nobody knows what we're going to do with this evidence. Don't let that happen. Now, low-hanging fruit. Some of you may have some low-hanging fruit in your property and you didn't even know it, okay? Uh, and depending, I've probably been in 300 or 400 property rooms in my career. I always thought everybody did the same thing, and I can say honest, after 35, 40 years of teaching this and all the audits we've done, nobody does it the same. Lots of cases, lots of departments out there. An officer turns a piece of evidence in, writes his or her report. The detective, a detective supervisor reads the case. It's a rock through a window. We probably will not ever solve this one, and they will not assign that case to a detective. On the other side, the rock through the window, and we have a video of it, and we have somebody in custody. Well, we're going to assign that to a detective. So I look at that as assigned cases and unassigned. If the case was never if the case was never found to was never assigned to a detective, I'm going to call that is the low-hanging fruit in that nobody's ever going to look at that evidence. And that may be low-hanging fruit that if you could ever get that list of cases during your case review, that make your life a little bit easier. Now, 15.5, the authority to purge. The final purge authority rests with the case officer. I've said it, I'll say it again. It's the detective's responsibility or other authorized person. Policy must define who has the authority, which we just mentioned that. The case officer must be a part of the decision process. It's their case, and they probably have more knowledge than anyone else. That is the best practice, the best way to do it. The evidence custodian should not be the decision maker. They are the guardian of the property. They're responsible for caring for it, doing the reviews, etc. They shouldn't be making the decisions. Now, when they on 15.5 authority to purge continuing, The final purge authority rests with the case officer, authorized personnel. Fact, in some jurisdictions, the district attorney, state's attorney want to be involved in it. That's fine. In major cases such as homicides, kidnapping, sexual assault, they should be. And also in those cases, the prosecutor should probably be involved in some of those. And again, every state, every county is going to be different. All the prosecutors look at, but the best practice on those major cases is some type of review by the prosecutor's office, especially in homicides. We shouldn't be making that in an isolated, oh, let's, go ahead and get rid of it. Get the prosecutor, make sure they don't have a problem with it. Now, when it comes to releasing it back to the owner, written electronic authorization. All releases should be authorized by the case officer. We should have some record on something on the property record that shows who authorized it. Very important because when I look at a property record when doing audits, I'll say who authorized it, and there's nothing on the record who authorized it. Very important because if something happens down the line, you as the evidence custodian want to make sure that it doesn't look like you made that approval. Any exceptions should always be memorialized in policy. Found in safekeeping, I have no problem with the property officers making that decision. That's always been the norm around the country. The detectives generally don't have to get involved in it. However, if there's a firearm, we might want to consider some additional approval process when there's a gun. Owner notifications when we send our letters and cards to people to come get it. Owner notification responsibility. Evidence officer should make all the formal notifications to claim the property. So when the detective says it's okay to get rid of, we need to send the card or the letter to have a record of that. One of the things, folks, be very, very careful. If the detective calls the person and says to come and get it, if the detective sends a letter, we don't know about it. So let's say the detective said, Mrs. Jones, it's okay to come down and get your stuff, and we don't know about that. And let's say the person doesn't come in, that sits on the shelf forever. We need to be a part of any notification system when especially when it's from another party. Um, very few of our states require that we send anything out registered mail. We encourage you not to send it registered mail unless it's something of high value, guns, money, narcotics. When I say narcotics, some departments we give the drugs back. If you're in California, we get to give them back. But just your general evidence, unless it has something of real value, and we ask people in the class, I think every class I've ever taught, how many of you have been sued? How many of you had a claim filed against you about us prematurely getting rid of something and get a lawsuit? Nobody raises their hand, folks. And I always tell everybody the reason nobody raises their hands about the lawsuits is because we still have everything. We've had a hard time getting rid of it. Document in the property record when the card or letter was sent. Track the notices in the card or sent a tickler file. Specific claim dates. And a DDD stands for drop dead date. And any letter, any card that you send out should have a drop dead date. You need to pick this up within or by this date, within 30 days, with 14 days. Some of you keep it 60, 90 days. I don't know why, unless there's something in your statutes, and probably not. I would say 14, 21 days is very reasonable. And if they haven't picked it up, but if you tell anybody on cards and letters when you send them out that you need to pick it up or it's going to be destroyed by policy, make sure that it's in your policy. Time limits, there you go, 15 days. And if not, it will be destroyed as per policy. Let's talk about auctions for a minute.
Hey, Joe,
Yes, go ahead.
just a quick, could you go back one slide on your 15 days? And that is generally a policy and it varies. So I know that in Washington State, we have to give the owners 60 days to claim their items in the letter. So we send the letter and it says you have 60 days from the date of this letter. So don't just assume that you can only give them 15 days. You may want to research and find out what your jurisdiction, if it has a time frame that you give owners.
Thank you, Shannon. One of the things for all of you, if you're new to property evidence, you're going to find the vast majority of the things we do in the property room there's no statutes that cover the stuff. They're very vague. I know here in California, our found and safekeeping property statutes were written in the late 1800s. and they rarely get updated. It's just a fact. Nothing gets changed in law unless something really bad happens. Then police chiefs and sheriffs, they try to get some legislation to cover that. But our laws throughout the country they're very old. They really are, and they rarely get changed. Rape kits have changed and things like that, and that makes a lot of sense. Things with DNA, that makes a lot of sense. And that's one other thing I want to bring up. When it comes to evidence such as rape kits and things like that, or any DNA, a lot of our states now, and you should familiarize with your state on specific time frames that you have to keep things. Both Shannon and I were talking about the statute of limitations. That stuff with DNA in some states may be one of those exceptions. Here in California, we have to keep things uh, if the person is still in prison and there may be DNA as a part of that case. So that's one, but researching it is not easy. It's really not.
Yeah. And here in Washington State, we have some new statutes that specifically discuss sexual assault kits and DNA work product. And even if, certain sexual assault kits have to be held for, I think it's 60 years, and DNA work product has to be held for 99 years. Now, DNA work product is, say, you send something to the crime lab, let's say it's a pair of pants, and the crime lab then swabs certain areas and gets some DNA profiles. When you sent it to the lab, you sent one item. When you get it back from the lab, let's say now it's 3 items because it's a pair of pants and 2 swabs that are DNA work product. So our statute in Washington State, it doesn't apply to the genes, it applies to those swabs that are classified as DNA work product. And I tell agencies, I recommend that you create a very specific location just for DNA work product. When it comes back from the lab, don't store it with the regular evidence because it could get pulled and destroyed accidentally. Segregate it, put it in this DNA work product location, and you put a big red sign on there that says nothing from this location ever gets destroyed. And that way you're meeting the statute. Now, every one of the 50 states has different statutes and policies on that. So definitely research your own and make sure that you are holding those, regardless of how long that person's in prison, you still have to hold it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chef. Folks, this is really, we've been teaching this class for years, and the difficulty is going from state to state to state, and nobody has the statutes are different in every single state, and some states have no statutes that even govern what we do. A lot of what we talk about is common sense and things that we can kind of pass on that we've seen that kind of work. When it comes to doing auctions, most of our state statutes may talk about it. Uh, Usually we can get rid of things by an auction. We used to all have our own auctions at the back door twice a year, and we'd have the auctioneer come in and sell it all from the back of the station. Well, that's kind of evolved now, and we're doing it. Private companies are picking it up, and a lot of us are using companies like propertyroom.com that do that, and they'll come and pick it up. They do a good job. But let me suggest to all of you, when we're writing our policies, documenting the statute in the policy provides any new employees knowledge about the statute. We give these poor people, and folks, some of you work in really progressive departments who do everything right. Understand some of our property rooms, out of the 18,000 of them out there, um, you're 18 years old, you get a job, and somebody says, "Here's the keys, have a good time." There's no policies, no procedures, and all you do is have the keys to the kingdom. And I think it's just a great idea that anytime we're writing our policy, if we can put the statute where that comes from, then at least if that new employee reading it kind of has some idea, oh, we can auction it. Oh, and here's the statute. And it gives them a tool when they're doing their job. Continuing on auctions, define the auction process, having a transfer list, obtain signatures from the auctioning company or if somebody picks it up, release release documented after possession is taken. So when the auction company comes to get it, they're going to have a manifest or something, but we should have a signature from the auction company, and every one of those items should be checked off as they take them. And again, in every state's a little bit different on this. Here in California, there's a lot of departments who will not let their folks bid on anything that's at the auction, you have to put that in policy, what you think is a good policy or not. And again, are we going to define firearms? A lot of departments or 8 or 10 states, they have to sell them. They have to sell them by code. But let's put it in our policy. We are or we are not. So the next person that goes in there knows that if you don't have it in your policy, then everybody asks around the department, "Oh, can we auction this?" Nobody knows. Get it in your policy whenever possible. Continuing. There's kind of the process. Case must be adjudicated. Case officer must have approved for final disposition. Define when the auction will occur. That may be based on quantity. It may be on a date during the year. Again, put it in your policy so that no new person knows what to do. Define where auction items to be stored, high security. Folks with guns, money, and narcotics, forget the money. We don't auction off money. Well, unless you had coin sets. But when you have items such as guns and you have drugs, they should remain in a secure area. They are the target of theft. If you followed us for a long time, you know those are the ones that get us in trouble 90% of the times. If you look at the headlines, 90% of the time it's guns, money, narcotics, guns, money, narcotics. And if a case has been adjudicated and we have a gun sitting on the shelf, it's fair to say the owner's probably not coming to get it. The detective doesn't need it. It becomes a target because nobody's going to be looking for it. Retain a running list of the items awaiting transfer to the auction company. Uh, Put it in your policy, how you're going to, what kind of company's going to do it. Is it going to be people coming picking up? Is it going to be online? Put it in the policy so the new person knows. And define who plans the auction. Never documented. And this is another thing. Never, 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 never. I guess we're trying to say never show anything documented, never show anything destroyed until it's actually reached that status, till it's left your department, till it's burned in the incinerator. Uh, Policy. So that's it on the firearms. Oh, one other one. Let me go back. Firearms, yes or no? Everybody, we all have different philosophies depending on what state you're in. We have statutes that govern this. Put it in your policy that you're going to do it or not do it. And the reason I say that is you can have an administrator thinks it's a good idea to do it. You can have an administrator thinks it's a bad idea to do it. Then we're running our property based on somebody's philosophy. Your staff should say, we're going to do it, we're not going to do it. Put it in policy. And then if there's a change of heart, then we have to have an intelligent adult discussion whether we're going to do it or not and keep it in our policy. Let's talk about sometimes departments call it diversion, some it's conversion. That's when uh, we're going to use it for department, county, or city use. Not unusual. And again, like we said with auctions, policy should include a statutory authority. And again, that's for the new employee, so he or she knows where they're getting that authority to do it. When it comes to a diversion policy, case must be adjudicated, have the approval, and again, there should be a justification memo. One of the things, whoever needs it, let's say the training bureau needs a projector they should write a justification memo. Case officer must have approved it, and again, has to go through the chain of command. Define the request process, include a third party. Some agencies will require maybe the purchasing director, somebody in another department. It's transparent, it's cleaner, as opposed to just doing everything in the police department. Then people think that we're fooling around playing games with it. Never document anything has been diverted until it's diverted, which goes along with all the other things we've said, and then update your record when it's all done. Now,
Joe, can I interrupt for just a second?
obviously,
Going back, the I learned this the hard way because an auditor really dinged me for this. She said, show me a list of all of the items that have been converted to departmental use. So I showed her the list and she said, okay, let's go find them. And we had to go out and we had to find them. And she said, it's important that you indicate it is converted to departmental use and you identify each one of those pieces of I'm going to say evidence, with a tag or something on there that says is for departmental use only, must be returned to the property and evidence unit after you're done using it. And then a little note like maybe the case number and item number, because once they're finished with it, like they're remodeling the training room and they don't need the projector anymore, they need to give it back to you so you can do whatever needs to be done with it, whether it's destroy it or auction or whatever. It's not simply with the department forever and ever, because if they think they can hand it to one person and off to another person and then to another department, they cannot do that. So I recommend that you actually include these types of items in your inventories. Do an inventory of them once a year and make sure they still are where they say they are.
Great idea. Great idea.
Thanks.
So when it comes to getting rid of it, needs the case officer approval, obviously. And again, we're going to go through our little bullets like we've done. Approval, remove any labeling. And when it goes into the trash, we don't want things showing up in the trash and then having barcodes on it, which has happened before. Putting it in the trash. If you have a trash can in your property room, we'll say a dumpster, and you put it and you're the person responsible for getting into the trash truck, that's one thing. But if you have trash that is maybe susceptible to other people having access to, we would always suggest that you render it inoperable before you put it
Hmm.
into the trash. Location for guns and drug pending destruction. Again, high priority, lock and key. Don't put them in an area that has any less security than you would with active guns. Have a running gun list. And a third party, when you do your destruction, a third party, somebody from out of the property, check each one of those off. And again, and this is going to be a good something for Shannon to talk about. We ask people in the class how many people are typing up gun lists. And we'll ask, when's the last time you did a destruction? Oh, last month. How many guns? I had 200. I'll ask all of you, how many, if you have a case, an item, a barcode number, a make, a model, serial, caliber, etc., how long does it take you to type up one line item? How long, if it's in a spreadsheet, how long would it take you to type that 200 guns? And you multiply that. Shannon, how long should that list take if it's done right?
Oh gosh, maybe 20 seconds.
I think that's too long. I'm going
Okay, 10 seconds. I was being,
to.
and maybe if they're fumbling on where do I click? Where do I click here? Yeah, you should be able to just even one click one of the button and it should generate it for you.
Folks, understand that the gun is on the shelf. The drugs are on the shelf. Somebody said, let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of it. I'm going to move that to a shelf. Guns for destruction, narcotics for destruction. And that's just a new shelf location in my property. It's time to do it. Give me a list of everything on that shelf. And there's your list. Shannon, I think that was 20. That's way too long. How about 7.5 seconds? It's just,
Okay, how
oh,
about 5 seconds? As much time as it takes to take your hand, put it on your mouse, find the icon, push it, and hit print. So, yeah, 5 seconds.
for those of you that are using a spreadsheet, we are praying for you, just so you know.
Yeah, yeah, pray for you.
Any special directions for biological evidence should be in there. And again, that may be a special vendor that comes to get it. Never document. Again, we've said it time and time again. And some of you are gasping right now. And what does the lady say here? I need help.
I need help. You're not going to get it, girlfriend. Don't hold your breath.
That's Shannon knows where that was. Folks, we didn't stage that. That's something that Shannon was involved in and I was involved in. And it's pristine now. But I think it's fair to say there's some of those things could have been purged. But what happens is you tell your sergeant or your immediate boss, "Hey, I need some help." Uh, and folks, you're not going to get any help unless you do some of the things we're going to suggest here. And let's look at that right now. I want you to take a look at the chart. No data, no help. Pay attention. No data, no help. Look at the chart. This is real numbers from a particular department. And if you look at the red bar chart there, the red lines, you can see over the last 10 years, they were taking in 12,000 up to 19,000 items a year. Okay. A lot of that we can't control. Crime can change. We can add, a population, more officers, different crime trends. But what we can control is what we're getting rid of. But I want you to look at the yellow and kind of look at that. Back in 2015, they were doing, sort of, kind of okay. In 2024, they're taking in, for every item, they're taking in six more items than they're getting rid of. Does anybody see a problem? Now, I want
I
you to ask yourself, I want you to ask yourself, what do your numbers look like? And folks, we ask in the class and nobody knows. They can't get that information out of the data, and that is really easy stuff to extract if you have good software. Now, let's go. Let's look at the same data in another one. No, that is what the inventory has gone up in 10 years. It's gone up to nine. They've taken in 98,000 more items than they've gotten rid of, and the only person that knows it is who? Is the person that works in the property. And folks, as a retired lieutenant teaching this class, I can tell you that sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and chiefs typically have not worked in the property room. They don't understand our struggles. And it's unusual for a chief to say what's going on inventory wise in the property room. And I don't blame them. They didn't know they wanted to know that. But I'll tell you, when you show a report like to the chief, they go, well, what in the hell's going on? Pardon my French, folks. They say, what's going on in there? And they don't know because it's not their world. We chase bad guys for a living. We don't we don't take care of stuff. So
And administrators just don't understand what is involved and all the steps that are involved in being able to dispose something out. They just don't understand. They say, well, why aren't you getting rid of more stuff? But then they don't understand the process.
they don't realize it can take you 3 days to get rid of one item when you're researching it, of all the places you may have to go and look. Now, I'm putting this on here, and some of you are probably gasping. You got to be kidding. You got to be kidding. I'm not kidding.
Mm-mm.
Um, I will tell you there's a very large department. Las Vegas is a good example. For the last few years, they've been getting rid of more than they take in. They have 4,500 officers. Tucson is another one that does an outstanding, and they get to this ratio. I retired from a department that was a one to run for years. It can be done. And now in closing, I got an email. Yes, let's see if I can. Oops. Okay, you got there's an email I'm going to show you. Number one, in order for your purging process to work, you have to have good data, and you can't look at it over 1 year. That doesn't tell you anything. If you're turning in reports to your sergeant every week or every month how much you got rid of, it doesn't mean a thing to me. I need to look at it for 5 to 10 years to know what's going on. If it's short term, you can't make any determinations. You need good policies, management support. See, it's easy to say, and robust evidence software that manages your evidence. That does, and a lot of your systems out there, your that have records, CAD, and property, they will spend most of the time developing a good CAD and good RMS, but property modules are just not important to them. That does not sell the product. So having a good software system, and generally you'll find those with the standalones that will integrate with the RMS systems.
I
And
was just helping an agency yesterday with this, and we ran a report, and it was a pie chart, and it showed everything that had come in a certain date range, and then it had what came in that was evidence found property, safekeeping for destruction, and then they had a second pie chart that showed everything that went out in that same time period, what was, say, destroyed, auction, released to owner, that type of thing. So you could very easily see the comparison.
yeah, folks, but managers sometimes, and when I say sworn managers especially, that's it's not our world. They don't know to ask the question, and then when you get the data, they go, "We have a problem, don't we?" Um, Monday, I got an email, and I've crossed the name. I think I got rid of all the names. Folks, November 10th. Good morning, and this was to me. The timing for this email was perfect. As I discussed with you guys a few months back, our intake to disposition ratio went from 8 to 1 to 1 to 2. In other words, they were taking in 8 and they were getting rid of 1. And 1.2 in 4 years. Yes, I'm reading the verbatim here. Yes, we out process two things for every one thing that comes in. Last week, we surpassed 100,000 items disposition this year. That is more than we have got in a decade, folks. They didn't have enough people and they didn't have good systems. I just want you to know disposition process is absolutely possible with the right collaboration. If you want to ever chat about it, give me a call, which I intend to, folks. But I'm talking about one to one. here's a very large department, and if I had heard back from him, I'd put it where he was from. But if they got rid of 100,000, it's a big department. It's about 1,000 officers. They're really doing a good job. And Shannon, do you want to say anything about purging?
Do it.
Do it. And don't. I used to tell people, when in doubt, throw it out. That will get you in trouble.
Yes, yes, that will.
I
Absolutely.
want to thank her. Well, look at that. It's 10:59. We did pretty good. Uh,
No, just that really we need to be as diligent as we are in bringing things in and logging them and getting them on the shelf. We need to be just as diligent as bringing things up for review and getting them purged. I have a whole section, a 2-hour section on just the whole dispo process, and that's you can't let that slide. You can't say, "Well, we'll destroy stuff when we have time, when things slow down." When we get another person. You can't have that mentality because that day will never come. So you have to just set aside dedicated time that you're going to work on purging your items.
Let me add something to that. With 30 years in law enforcement, working all the different assignments that I've had, I always look at like our record bureau, and I look at the people who go to the crime scenes, and I look at dispatch and whatnot. When they're short on help, what do? They can hire somebody and they can backfill, so we have a minimum number of people out there. In the property room, when we get behind, we just go home and we get behind her. That's a word that we've coined in our class. We get behind her and behind her and behind her, and nobody ever looks at the numbers. When you get behind, folks, it's almost impossible to get caught up, and that's why it's so important to stay on top of it. And I'm going to go one more slide. If you've never been to one of our classes, this is our calendar for next year. As you can see, we are all over the place. We're as far ahead scheduling classes this year as we've ever been. And down at the bottom are some TBAs, but we're from California all the way to Maine and Florida to Washington, and some in a lot of places in between. And we also have an advanced class that we're tying all those advanced classes on the right to our 2-day classes. So whatever you see on the right is going to be in conjunction with the 2-day class. If you use the QR code, see, I'm old, and QR codes just didn't make sense to me until recently. If you take a picture of that, it will take you to our registration site. And my last slide here, folks, if you become a member, there's lots of advantage to the membership. I mean, the magazine that we put out, newsletters we put out. We have a certification process where you, as the evidence custodian, can become a certified property and evidence specialist. And lastly, we have a program. We've had it for a number of years. It slowed down with COVID because we couldn't get out there, but we are back into the accreditation uh, services that we provide. We've had, I think, 3 or 4 this year. We got a whole list for next year, and it's been very successful. And the person that does that, very interesting. She's the accreditation officer for a particular police department, and so her world is accreditation. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending. And Cheryl, did you want to say something about questions, etc.?
I do. Yes, thanks everybody for attending and hanging in there with us. I'm going to ask our board members now to share a couple of questions or 1 or 2 questions each that they feel like would benefit the entire group. And as I do that, I'm going to put this up on the screen. This is our next webinar, which is in December. So keep an eye out for that. Again, when those emails come through, at least click on them, open them so that you stay active on their list so you can get those emails. So let's see. Let's start off with Rick. Do you have a question or two that you feel like would really benefit the group? You
I
have to
think one of
unmute
the
yourself.
main things that, yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think one of the main things that came through is how do you feel better about your job when you have a lack of support from the administration? That seemed to be a fairly common theme.
And Shannon and Joe, do you have a response to that or?
Shannon, go ahead while I'm thinking about that one.
You cut out a little bit and I missed the last part. So can you give me a Reader's Digest version of your question?
Yeah,
I didn't
just
hear everything.
a lot of the evidence personnel feel defeated because they can't get the resources they need. What
Right.
advice would you give them?
Just keep plugging away, and see if there's anything that you can do to help your administration understand the importance of your job and the ramifications of what happens if you don't do your job correctly. Help them by, looking at coming in, taking a little tour, maybe having them, showing them your stats, what comes in, what goes out. I think one of the biggest uh, benefits is if you can bring your supervisor, your sergeant, your captain, your chief down into your property room and tell them, show them the challenges that you're facing. Joe, how about you?
Yeah. Well, I had one thought, and I'm sure a lot of the people that are women are never visited this before. We post headlines from around the country, and most of them are very negative, and lots of them are police administrators going to jail over property room problems. And I always say that the property room problem, as a police administrator, an officer can do something on the street and get fired, and usually when whether it be a shooting or driving or anything else, the officer loses his job, but the police chief doesn't. When it comes to property rooms, police chiefs lose their jobs on a regular basis because they're responsible for it and they had some control over it. So sometimes you can go through our library of headlines there and print that out and show it to your captain or your lieutenant and say, here's what happens if we don't pay attention to this. But like Shannon said, those numbers are really important. 99% of the time, the police administrators have no idea how far behind we're getting every year. And so if you can ever get that information out. Anything else, Rick?
Nope, not for me.
Okay.
Fantastic. Joe, do you have a question that you feel like would benefit the entire group?
I would say that some of the questions that I've been answering have to do with ammunition destruction and what agencies are doing with ammunition. I know that my agency would sell it through propertyroom.com, but that was one of my responses. I know there's companies out there like Weapons and Effects, but that was mainly the one I was seeing a lot.
I'll jump on that one real quick. I have found that ATF can also be a good resource for taking your ammo. Some agencies will give it to their what are they called? Range master. Will give it to their range master to shoot, and if you do that, that is destroyed. Okay. That ammo has been destroyed, and your method of destruction was you had the range master do it. Do not mark that it's converted to departmental use. I've seen so many agencies do that, and no. So that ammo gets destroyed.
Fantastic.
I know there's a company out there right now trying to get into the market. Well, and again, you just have to follow us. But we did a survey just recently for this company to see what interest there was in ammunition. So we may see them popping up as an advertiser in the next 6 months or so. But he's a DEA officer who has come up with some tools to come to you and destroy them. So
Oh,
and
yeah, I get that question a lot.
it's expensive to get rid of it. It really is. Gun busters will take your ammo if they take your guns. Gun busters provides a service. They pick up the guns. I think in some cases you ship it to them. They part it out, so everybody should know that. So most of the gun is destroyed. Or the parts, firing. Let's see. The serial number is destroyed, and they send you a video of that. But they will do ammunition if they have that other service, and they'll do hard drives, anything that's metal, but it's gunbuster. So
Fantastic. Fantastic. Kirsten, did you have anything you'd like to share with the group that you felt would be valuable?
I've answered a number of questions related to manuals that can be used. And I just have been directing people to the IAPE website because we have a great resource page there that has packaging manuals, policy manuals, a whole bunch of great resources that I think all of the participants can benefit from. And other than that, I've been trying to jump in and answer some other questions along with the other panel members, but that's what I've seen the most of.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, I just want to thank everyone again for taking time out of your day to spend it with us. Thank you so much to Joe and Shannon for this presentation. It was really outstanding, and to our board members that are with us today, Rick, Joe, and Cheerson, as well as Amanda Latta with FileOnQ, who arranged everything and kind of herded all the cats today. So thanks so much, Amanda, for stepping up and doing that. We hope to see you again in December at the next webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email FileOnQ or IAPE with those, and we will send out a recording in the next day or so along with a certificate of attendance. So until we see you again in December, everybody be safe and have a good holiday coming up here in November.